Hello, everyone. My name is Robert Annis. I'm an Agile coach and trainer, but what does that mean? It's a pretty common title these days. My focus is very much on organizational agility, but not merely based upon the normal approach of Agile and Scrum and those kinds of things. Really focused on organizational and individual psychology. So really my focus is very much on the growth and development of people and their organizations through well understood psychological theories and practices. And that's really led me down a certain path that isn't just your standard approach. So a lot of the things that I focus on aren't just about agility. They're about the things that align with it and frankly, sometimes become necessary for Agile to succeed. So really my background focuses on that, and that's really where my career path is leading me more and more. So I'm hoping with the discussion with John to bring a bit of that sense of interest, really. Fingers crossed.
Robert, I often get asked what is organizational agility? What does it even mean? And I was challenged actually, I think it was 3 years ago. I wasn't working in a software domain. I was working in non-software. I have been for the last 3 years, even though I was originally a software developer. But I was asked, what is it, And because we had people using the word agile all over the place, but what is agility, and is it the same thing necessarily? So I think maybe let's start with why we need to back up and redefine organizational agility, and then introduce what we think it kind of boils down to. And so basically, I'm going to talk about maybe what it's not. For example, we often hear this expression "change theater," where we're just relabeling, moving the seats around the chairs around the Titanic, so to speak, words and whiteboards, stickers and all that kind of stuff, and dogma, step-by-step processes, and so on. And and really, it's about delivering value in 5 dimensions, which I'm going to get into fairly soon. And change is constant. It's not something that you manage. It's for me. I work with a lot of clients who have transformations, including the current one. And for me, it's kind of sad when there are transformations, because it should just be the way we do things. In some organizations, the level of consciousness might not be there yet, so we need these kind of injections to get something moving. But we should really be trying to set some kind of cadence or some kind of way where the organization can improve itself. And maybe I'd like to talk about as well, what does it look like, what does it feel like when we really have that? I mean, what have you noticed so far, Robert?
Wow. This is a big topic. So in organizational agility, it's anything and everything. I think one of the biggest issues with agility is it's a word in the dictionary, and therefore can mean anything. If they'd made up a word and then defined it, it would be very, very clear, right? But yeah, agile can mean anything. I mean, I get a little tired of people sort of saying to me, "Oh, we don't know what we're doing. We'll figure it out later. We'll be agile." That's not what it means. So I think organizational agility for me is it won't be the same for everyone. So please don't think that I have definition. But for me personally, it means a few different things. One, it means a new organizational model in the sense of organizational theory. So at the beginning of time, when humans started off, there was no organizations. We were individuals. And then as time moved on, we started living together in small groups. And finally, those became tribes. And you had chiefs. And at that point, you start having people understanding how that organization works. You keep marching forwards, and you get to the Industrial Revolution. And now you're at the point with quite a complicated way of working. People understand long-term plans, things like that. But now the world we live in is quite different. It's much more complex technologically. It's much more complex from a globalization point of view. And so it's not about agility being a target. It's not about becoming agile. For me, organizational agility is about being agile in our thinking and being open to change, not achieving a target as such.
Yeah, I agree.
So it's not about an end state.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think that for me is a big shift, because most other things are read a book and know how to do it. You know what I mean?
Totally.
And I think it's I think, as you said in the previous video, it's about being adaptive, and maybe that's a big part of the fact that you're building the organization to work and think that way. And then the other piece, John, for me, is about where the responsibility lies. That it's no longer held with the higher ups, that it's something that's spread across the organization, because that's what allows the organization to be agile. The decisions are not only made at the top.
Yeah, I totally agree. And for that reason, when we're talking about, what the end might be, I think it's useful to understand what value means, because we're talking about value so much, and what does it mean? So I made an attempt, Robert, to come up with something, and I'd love to.
This should be interesting.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this over a few years, and this is my fourth attempt now, believe it or not. So God love me, but. So I think value can be a mixture from a few different perspectives, and I wouldn't be preaching to anybody about what they should be, but you could kind of pick and choose depending what organization you are, I guess. And so the most obvious one would be value from the market, for the market, the customer, the consumer, the end user, selling, meeting needs and wants, I guess, and changing behavior in a good way. There's the boring old one, which we have to accept, which is organizational value. Sometimes organizations do want to be more efficient and so on. I'm not saying that's the right thing to do. I think try to do the right thing and then try to do it right or later. But if you're trying to just do the wrong thing right, or as Russell Lakoff said, you're just going to be wronger, right? So. But it is something to be considered, to be fair. And there's also stakeholders that we need to worry about, and employees, of course, probably one of the more important stakeholders. And of course, reputation of the organization. There'd be kind of two considerations so far, right? And then I used to talk about societal value, but I've kind of crystallized that now into the 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So I think one of the reasons why the world is in the state that it's in is because we have been chasing customer, end user, consumer value almost to a fault. That's loads of plastic and carbon and all that kind of stuff. There's 17 goals there. Not saying which ones you choose, but if you are delivering value, can you reduce your impact on the planet? This kind of stuff. But there could be other things as well: diversity, inclusion, all that kind of thing as well.
Sure. Yeah.
And then there's learning. As some people say, learning is the first citizen, and I'm kind of in that camp a little bit as well. But that could be in relation to the above, like the customer often struggles to articulate what she wants. So maybe helping her to do that through experiments, looking at analytics, doing research or whatever. And I think we'd be naive to think that it would be just all of those 4 points. I think there's an additional one, which is reducing risk. John Seddon talks about failure demand, which essentially means doing something that isn't right for the customer. Driving some projects home and killing the call centers. So customers are basically ringing with complaints because it doesn't work. And in some cases, 80% of telephone calls going into call centers are customers complaining, quite irate, actually. You don't know how to spell my name. It's asked me for my password 7 times. This kind of thing. I've only got one hand. I'm on a building site. Why you expect me to actually do another code on another phone as well? What are you talking about? And also technical mess. I didn't say the word technical debt, because debt is something that you think you're going to pay back. Sometimes people just create a mess and they don't go back. So reducing that technical mess. And if you have a backlog, like a product backlog, if you use Scrum, for example, I often talk about sticks of dynamite that are down the product backlog. Do we need to kind of bring them up and do a little bit of a controlled explosion and find out if this is going to blow up, like can we kill this before we spend loads of millions, kind of thing, and lots of energy. So what are your thoughts on that, Robert, in terms of value?
It's a really interesting discussion. This isn't just an agile discussion. It's just the concept of value is an interesting topic in itself. For me, I struggle with absolutes. The sort of what is value. Right? Because whenever you try and define it, it's going to be different from somebody else. Right? And I think that's one of the risks we have to consider. And I think that the second risk with the absolutes of value is that you can just cheat the system. And we see this all the time when one of my clients, they had this is how we understand value. And it was sort of impact and urgency, effectively. And my argument was simply, well, how do you ascertain the impact and how do you ascertain the urgency? And they said, well, we talk to the people who it's going to impact and we talk to people who it's an urgency. So, well, can't they just lie? If they want their piece, can't they just say, well, it's really impactful, it's really urgent? How is that a measurement? So they're basing these absolute figures on things. And it's a bit like Scaled Agile Framework. SAFe has the WSJF, weighted shortest job first, right?
Yeah.
A complicated formula to understand value. And value doesn't actually mean anything, is my argument. Nothing has any intrinsic value, right? If I said to you, I don't know, money, right? Money's a good example. Money has value. A £50 note, a €50 note, $50 note, whatever it is, that has value. Only because you, I, and everyone else agrees that it has value. If tomorrow all the banks suddenly said, no, we're not taking £50 notes anymore, suddenly that has no value. It only has value because the system it's in, and critically, what it's compared. That £50 note is valuable because it can buy you this much of something. So for me, value is actually a comparison. This is more valuable than that. That's how I ascertain value, because an item on its own has no intrinsic value. So I always come back to the fact that whatever it is, it has to be well understood and compared to other things. And then you understand its value compared to that. So that's how I think of value. I'm not saying it's right, but I struggle with sort of the absolutist definition of value. And I think it's a very hard thing to do. And I don't think there's any correct answer, but I like your idea of trying to understand it, to be able to explain it. It's a tricky thing.
Yeah, I can totally relate to what you're saying, Robert. I was in a company about 10 years ago, and we could actually calculate exactly how much money we were making in US dollars from the features, because it was a mobile app.
Yep.
We were sending offers out to the phone, and then people would redeem the offer at the till. Boom, ching, ching. You know, we could tell straight away. But we decided even then not to use money as the determining of value, because we wanted more people to download the app.
Exactly.
And use the app and so on. And so, yeah, I've had lots of attempts in my naive days of doing formulas and stuff before I ever knew about WSJF. And they're always wrong anyway. They just help you. There was one brilliant coach that I worked with in Northampton, and she said to me, John, this product owner came to her one day and said, I can't sort these. I need everything. So the coach said, no problem, I'll sort them alphabetically. And then she went, whoa. It's like, and you're right, it's all relative. But you just need to understand, like, what are we considering here when we talk about this? And yeah, you can't be absolute about it. I totally agree with that.
No.
Yeah.
And it does come back to also the idea that there is a right answer. We know what is most valuable.
Yeah.
You won't know until they're all actually out there and they're being used or whatever, right?
Exactly.
I mean, it's so odd to think of what do you consider valuable, right?
Yeah.
There's so many people out there who became millionaires and billionaires with something you think that would never be valuable. No one's going to want that. And yet you put it out there and it is, right? It's an interesting thing to think about, right? The push when mobile phones first became smartphones, right, was, I can see a sort of web page. This is really cool. Now most people don't use their phones to look at web pages. They use apps. And at first that wasn't the focus, but Apple's made its billions because they recognize they're building a platform to sell apps, right? So it's fascinating what is value. And I think the answer is it shifts, it changes.
It does. Thank you very much. Very good insights there, Robert. Yeah. So we're now going to move on to what is organizational agility. And I made an attempt to kind of put it together, but the first sentence I'm going to use isn't from me. It's from a man called Ken Schwaber, who is one of the co-authors of the Scrum Guide. I think it still kind of holds. The purpose of the next segment is not really about coming up with something very pithy, like the sentence I'm going to tell you, which is nice and short. The problem with short sentences that are a pity and all that is that it can be very open to interpretation. So the rest of this conversation is going to be about trying to be clear about what it actually is. And again, it's not absolute, because for different organizations, different words will be higher up the list than others and so on and so forth. But just kind of a starting point to say, well, okay, if you don't know what it is, let's just stick this up on the wall and move the words around and see what works for us, and maybe get rid of some of those words. So the short sentence is organizational agility is an organization's ability to harness change for competitive advantage, which captures a lot of things, and I think it still holds true. What do you think, Robert?
I've read it before. I wouldn't have said I remembered it. I couldn't have quoted it to you.
Yeah.
And I think it's good. I don't think it covers it for me, because, or maybe it's just because it's constantly adapting and growing, and agility doesn't have a true definition, if you like. I think the world we're in now, I would say effectively that statement covers a VUCA world. In my mind, I was thinking about the volatility and the uncertainty. And I think that's what it's speaking to. And I think we're kind of there. We're in a world with global pandemics. We're in a world with globalization at a rate that's staggering. The growth of China is unbelievable. Asia's growing at crazy rates, but South America and Africa are really starting to ramp up. And technology is growing faster and faster, right? You just think of Moore's law, the rate at which processors are gaining transistors and so on. The world is actually gaining speed in its complexity. So is it about being adaptive to change? Absolutely. I think companies you have to be into that just to survive right now. The question is, how do you be further competitive, I think, in that situation? And then for me, organizational agility, because of that, is more about the mindset of the company of how are we going to meet that challenge? I think what you just described in that statement sort of, to me, defines the problem. It doesn't answer it. Maybe.
And you kind of you kind of confirmed for me as well that it was very open to interpretation, because it kind of gave you a double take, and also gave me a double take, and I think everybody who reads that sentence, and I've seen other versions as well, but you could kind of pick what you want out of it and what does it really mean. I think we're kind of the same page there. So what I did, I made this effort, and by the way, one of my talents is not making things simple, so this is a struggle for me, I have to confess. But I made an effort at trying to come up with something that's as short as possible but clear. So when you're trying to be clear, it means you kind of makes it a bit longer. Okay, so I'm trying to strike that balance. It's almost like a change story rather than a definition of agility or anything like that. So here's what I came up with so far, and with the help of lots of people, being honest. Okay, so here goes. So organizational agility is about creating an adaptable organization with higher possibility to drive disruption in society, the industry, and the marketplace. It's manifested through more effectiveness in optimizing current value, which is kind of like milking the cow that we already have, and unrealized value, which is the cow we haven't found yet, right? With more frequency of impact, more quality, more learning, less drag, more flow, then more efficiency, second last word, and more work sustainability, so that we can kind of do this for the long term.
Right.
So that's what I think it is. I'm going to get into later on what does it look like and what does it feel like. But what's your reaction so far to this, Robert?
I like it. Like you said, it's still quite a lot. It's still verbose. But how do you not how do you try to describe it without doing that is the tricky thing. I think the question for all these things is that sounds like an outcome. This is what the organization will be there. And the challenge for all leaders and thinkers is going to be, okay, great. And how do you
get there?
I mean, one of my favorite books is by Frederick Laloux. I don't know if you've read it. Reinventing Organizations. And it's very much about this kind of thinking about that. How do you develop in that direction? But no, I really like that. It gets me thinking about, as my brain will always go back to, sort of the psychologically, how does a company develop into that?
Yeah. I have some ideas on that, actually, that I'd love to talk to you about on another show. We've got a journey, if you like, that and the theme is hit delete. So to to develop this level of consciousness in the organization where we can achieve what we just talked about, we need to delete some things in the organization instead of adding things on. And I'd love to talk to you about that. It's a bit early days, but probably within a couple of months I should be able to talk more about that, and you probably have some ideas on it as well.
That would be great. Yeah, absolutely. It's a fascinating topic, no doubt about it.
Yeah. So really, what I'm trying to get out of this is, like, if we are going somewhere, what is it? You know what I mean? So yeah, kind of like a North Star almost. Yeah.
I think you've got a really good point. I think a lot of people will say, "Great, this is the manifesto, but what does it mean? What's this going to look like?"
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think your logic is sound. I think a lot of people will say to me, "Well, what does an agile mindset mean then?" Right, in the same sort of vein of, but what does it look like? How do I know what it is? And I think it's sensible to put that out there. I guess the big challenge is how you come to the conclusion that you've got there. Is it more powerful for an organization to figure that out themselves, of what we want to look like, and therefore you're empowering them to get to that themselves? Or do you create the milestone and say, this is where you're trying to get to?
Do you know what I find, Robert? I find that people really, really struggle, and they jump at efficiency straight away. We just want to milk the cow, and then they could get blown away and could get disrupted. So rather than giving them a blank page, I could actually create a sentence with a load of blank words, and they fill in the words themselves, and I could reveal them later on. But by having something, the idea is that you can move words around. So maybe we're not disrupting society. Maybe we're not in that place yet, for example. We're not even disrupting the industry. It might be just the marketplace. And maybe actually we're only looking at more current value right now, because that's where we are, kind of thing. So on your journey, you could strip that down and say, okay, if that's the North Star, what do we think we could achieve in the next, say, 12, 18 months? You know what I mean? And it is a bit of it's hard to reach. It's not very tangible. I would agree with that. There's a big journey to getting there. And what I'd like to get to next, to your point, is what does it look like? And what does it feel like? Okay. This is where it gets interesting, right? Because we do that too. Yeah. Okay, but let's go, right? So it looks like cognitively diverse people collaboration. That's a hat tip to Matthew Syed from his book Rebel Ideas in 2019. Fantastic book. One of my two favorite books. My other favorite book is Black Box Thinking, which is his book as well. So it looks like cognitively diverse people collaboration. I'm not even saying you have to be in a team. Possibly applying holacracy, for example.
Oh, okay.
And one of my colleagues, one of your colleagues as well, is actually practicing that. Could be agile, lean, could be lean. I think I'm talking more kind of 21st century lean rather than the manufacturing lean, if that makes sense. Lean, agile, the Kanban guys in there. Product management, there's a bit of a schism going on between agile and product management. There's lots of really good ideas in the product management world. So what I'm kind of saying here is you don't necessarily need to be following the Agile Manifesto. In fact, it doesn't even have to be product management. It could be the 3 ways of DevOps, or it could even be the modern Agile Manifesto. So I used to say it's underpinned by the Agile Manifesto, but I think actually that's assuming that people want to be using Agile. There are other ways to achieve agility, is kind of what I'm saying here. What do you feel about that, Robert?
I think you'd be careful. You get kicked out of the Agile Club.
Yeah.
No, I agree. I think agility sometimes can be its worst enemy, in that it can be you must do it this way. If you're not doing this, you're not agile, kind of thing. For me, I don't see agile as sort of the end goal, I guess, which is perhaps sort of what you're saying. For me, it's about creating a workplace that is more universally successful. And by that, I mean, it's not just about, for example, chasing profit or dates or whatever. So when you say, what does it feel like to work there? That people actually feel rewarded. That I guess to people that they're happy. The dream would be that you can create a workplace where people are certainly paid enough. I'm not saying they need to be, struggling for money, but their main reward is actually the work they're doing, right? I'm sort of straying into sort of Dan Pink's work here, I guess. But I think that we're at a point where the majority of people now are not working for food, right? The majority of people are not working because it's necessary, right? We have to have a job to make income. I understand that, but generally speaking, the majority of the world at the point of they're not earning money at that level, and now we're at sort of subsistence kind of level, and so what you do becomes more important. It reflects on you, and it impacts who you are and how you feel. So, I think quite simply, for me, where organizations are going requires a new level of consciousness, because we're not facing industrial revolution type problems anymore. We shouldn't be thinking in that way anymore of tell me what to do, I'll go and do it. And so I think really the big shift here for me for organizational agility is a shift towards organizations made of people who are consciously choosing how they work. And because of that level of empowerment, they'll have a greater level of self-satisfaction and of hope. And that's pretty much the reason why I do my job.
Yeah, that's kind of where we're going next, actually, right? So, like, in terms of what does it feel like as well? It feels like there's less BS, right?
That's a good cut through everything I said. That was a much better way to put it. Oh, there you go.
Yeah,
that's the version. Right.
I'm a big kind of hashtag no agile BS kind of guy, but and what does that mean? I guess less change theater, less delusion, less micromanaging, less fear. It's like saying, well, maybe I shouldn't. Leandro Herrera would be killing me. Why are you talking about things that people shouldn't be doing? Like, don't think of the red elephant, and that's exactly what we think of. But I think it's good to address it, and then to be more polite and positive about it. I guess it feels like more humanity, more authenticity, more leadership. Not necessarily leaders; could be leaders at all levels, right? More engagement, and not just worrying about the current revenues, but also worrying about the future revenues. So there's a hint here of worrying about the long term as well as the short term. Kind of trying to balance that.
Yeah.
So we're going to dig into this a little bit in terms of what do I mean by these, and then let's have a little chat about it. So what do we mean by more humanity? So more compassion. More invitation, not imposing ways of working on people. You have to do Scrum or whatever.
Right.
More psychological safety.
You're in my favorite place now. Yep, absolutely.
Good. And then trust, respect, team-based commitment, not people making commitment on behalf of teams. More openness, more inclusion, more passion, focus, and energy. There's a hat tip to Sumantri Ghoshal. He did a famous talk at the World Economic Forum a few years ago. And more fun, of course. So from a humanity point of view, dealing with that, from an authenticity point of view, well, really having self-managing teams, more self-managing teams. You don't have to be in a team, but if you do have teams, self-managing. More value. We talked about value earlier. More outcomes, more impact, the long-term effect. More sincerity, more empiricism, and more excellence. So we've got humanity, we've got authenticity there. But now we're going to move on to leadership, because one of the driving factors why I didn't go for a pithy explanation of organizational agility, because a lot of leaders, every second or third word was the word agile. And I had one particular case where executives, the people on the ground, I ran surveys on this, people on the ground, 75% of them believed that the executives knew what the problems were, and only 20% of them believed that the executives were doing anything about those problems. So I really want to drill in here on the expectations. Okay, so more self-awareness, more courage, because you're going to have to do some kind of brave things. More go see, actually find out what's going on. Be more acceptable about people speaking truth to power. And this is a hat tip to Simon Sinek. He describes sincerity as more alignment of what is said privately and publicly. Less backlogs, so we can be more optimized as a one organization. More prioritization. We can have all the flow we want, but if the work isn't prioritized, we're going to be in trouble. More focus and more flow. And then some real behaviors that we need from leaders, like embracing uncertainty, not expecting a beautiful Gantt chart for the end of the year, serving teams, coaching at all levels, fixing problems, not saying, oh, you've got a mandate. Yeah, you can fix that yourselves. No, we can't. Everybody. And then also, this is where the courage is needed, because often organization design work is needed. Because as you mentioned earlier on, Robert, what's our direction of travel or goal or whatever we're trying to achieve, our vision, whatever you want to call it, but like whatever that is, agility is only a way to kind of get there. And often you need to change your organization design to be optimized for that. Yeah. So what are your thoughts so far on these? I mean, I'm going to get to engagement and revenue later, but
how many hours do you have?
Yeah.
I like all of those. I think the first step for all of those for any of them to come to fruition is some level of self-awareness. Because unless we recognize the situation we're in, we can't look to change it. And I think it's very common for people to go to work and just think, but this is how work is. And that's why I always think about previous times in history, because I don't know the future as much as I wish I did, right? And we've worked in several different ways in the past. Now we work very much we're moving out of it, but the last few decades have been very much based on Taylorism. And so I think it's important that for all those things to occur, that we recognize the way we work, so we have the option to choose different ways of working. Until we know where we are, we can't shift. So self-awareness for me is what will give us those things. You talked about leadership at all levels. So in my mind, that's situational leadership, that anyone can lead, right? For those kind of things to occur, people need to be self-aware that they have the ability to lead a colleague, and that person can lead you at different moments and different times. We need to be self-aware of how we're interacting and how we pick our targets and how we can achieve them, right? To exactly what you spoke about. And I think that it's for the entire organization and individuals to take on this recognition and move in that direction, because we talk about our competitors all the time in industries, and we say, oh, we've got to be competitive, we've got to stay competitive. And it's usually about technologies and things like that. And those will continue. And it's simply a race as to who gets that technology first, right? But if you can actually be competitive in the sense of your organization becomes self-aware, well, then you're going to be miles ahead of your competitors. And I think all the points you're raising there about how the organization works and thinks together, it's not about creating a nice workplace. It's about recognizing that in the future, this will be how companies will be interacting and will be working, because the level of consciousness is going to shift. All the problems we have in our current workplaces are because they were created by that level of consciousness. Einstein said that problems can't be solved by the conscious level that created those problems. You have to move to the next level to be able to actually solve them. And for me, that's why I look at agility, because it allows us to look at problems from the next level so we can easily solve them. And so that, for me, that's where it all comes together.
Yeah, I can't wait to talk to you about that. I'm big into that as well. I did a lot of work in spiral dynamics as well, but I'm careful about talking about it because it hasn't been peer reviewed. But it's like nutrition and lots of other things, mightn't be scientifically proven a lot of the time, but still very useful and helpful. So I just want to get into the engagement and then the big question really about agile and agility. But so what do we mean by more engagement? So that's like with society itself, with shareholders, employees, customers, consumers, end users, partners, other stakeholders, but not through big bang, less big bang, but more transparency, inspection, adaptation, some kind of empirical looping approach where you're checking in with these stakeholders. Because actually a lot of them don't know what they want anyway, and we help them to figure out what they really want by showing them what they don't want, because if you get my point. And then what do we mean by more current and future revenues? Is, well, it's about having a more meaningful shared purpose. And so this is your point initially, Robert, where are we going? All right. And then more value, understanding needs and wants as well, outside in thinking, of the customer, in getting out of the building, meeting people. If there's some slowest part of your organization, if there's some kind of constraint, this is the hat tip to theory of constraints, maybe managing that, and hat tip to systems thinking, maybe more optimized as a whole.
Mm.
So that's quite a long definition of organizational agility. It is like a North Star.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm curious about, Robert, is, when some people say, agile is dead, long and live agility, what are your thoughts on that?
And we're back to the using a pithy line and how it's being interpreted, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I think that the Agile Manifesto has multiple problems with it, and it's easily looked at in a way that is potentially arrogant, who says things must be done this way. And I think agility is more about, as you said at the beginning, being adaptive. And so I think you move away from a statement of you must be agile, or agile's better than everything else, to we're just building an environment where the focus is on achieving more. And by more, I don't mean delivery of more work, right? I don't mean that kind of performance. I think of performance in the sense of more success for everyone. And so for me, it's, what do you think of as more agility in the future? I guess a good example would be a company like Volvo, right? Volvo turned around and said, we're going to be the first to be pure electric. We're going to be the first for somebody will never die in one of our cars, right? There's a target so far and above what any other car company was doing that most people just laughed at it almost. But they've seen a massive uptick in sales. Huge. And what you realize is they're tapping into things that aren't traditional. They're not just chasing money, right? And in a world where people are saying, we're worried about plastics, we're worried about carbon pollution, we're worried about the future of the planet, all these kinds of things, companies need to move beyond traditional models of making money to recognizing that, no, we need to do other things. Going back to your point of what's value, it's shifting, as it always does, but the thinking is shifting within companies as well. So for me, agility in this sense becomes about recognizing what's new and moving in that direction as to what's right for people. It's not a final destination, which maybe Agile felt like. So it's not about achieving something, it's about constant achievement, perhaps.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think the Agile Manifesto is still very useful, but in a sense, it's a form of imposition in itself. These are the values and these are the principles. So when I present them, I just say, well, what resonates with you? And we'll go with that. So it doesn't feel as imposed, but it could be interpreted like that. But more importantly, I think the Agile industrial complex has really messed up Agile. It got corrupted. I think we corrupt everything in the end. But I think it might be time to move on, to something else. Product management holds some hope for me, actually. But that'll probably get corrupted too at some point. We just need to recognize that we might be ready for a new thing, and there's more than one way to do this. And we need to be open to let people work what way they think is the best way to get there.
Absolutely. People should judge for themselves. Yeah.
And it presents different problems, for guys like you and me, because when we go in and if we've got different teams using different approaches, it's like, oh, we need to be consistent. So no, they don't need to be consistent. They just need to kind of sync up in some way. Maybe we do need some form of alignment, but that doesn't mean we all have to, do exactly the same approach. We can have autonomy with alignment, can't we?
Absolutely. Yeah, maybe one of the biggest challenges of as being an Agile coach, and by no way am I complaining. I love my job. Please don't think that. Is the fact that I think people at all the time bringing Agile coaches to be Agile teachers and say, come in and tell them how to do it.
Yeah.
Right? First problem, why are you bringing me in?
Yeah.
Are you going to change? Right, is the first one. A leader to change the is a first thing to talk to them about.
Yeah.
But also, a coach doesn't tell you what to do. That's not what coaching is. Coaching is about asking people what they think they should do and then helping them on their journey. Right.
Yeah.
Certainly, there's pearls of wisdom and all that kind of thing, but it's their journey. As a coach, I don't go in and say, you need to do this, because I don't know. They have all the context. They know their company, know their industry, their job and everything, right? So yeah, I think it's one of the challenges that Agile is being seen by some people as, a solve all, but we shouldn't be doing that, but more of a case of we just need to tell people how to do it. You can't tell people how to be agile. Agile is their own thing for each person. But for me, from my point of view of psychology, it's about the empowerment of people to be having better lives, better careers. And for each team and individual, that's going to be slightly different.
Robert, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today about Agile and organizational agility. And thank you so much for coming on the show.
Genuinely my pleasure. I really enjoyed it. Thank you, John.
Thank you so much.